Welcome to Grammar 5E. In this booklet, we will be reviewing everything you've learned from 5A through 5D so far. So we'll start with that. First, we learned a little bit more about verbs. You learned that there are transitive and intransitive verbs as well as linking verbs. And here are three examples. We have Oliver flies the plane. Notice that the plane is receiving the action of the verb flies. Therefore, that verb is transitive. It's transferring the action to an object. Whereas in the next sentence, we have the bee flies through the yard. Nothing is receiving the action of being flown. Instead, the bee is completing the action, and we have a prepositional phrase after that, so obviously we can cross that out and we know that nothing is going to be receiving that action. And then we have the flower smells nice. Remember that sometimes verbs can look like action verbs, but if we can replace it with a to be verb of a similar conjugation, then we know that it is in fact acting as a linking verb in that sentence, not an action verb. So here we have the flower smells nice. We can replace smells with is, and it still makes sense. The flower is nice. That doesn't really change the meaning of the sentence. So in that case, the flower is not completing an action of smelling. Instead, we have a linking verb with that verb. So now we're going to go over verbals, which is something that was introduced back in Grammar 4, and we have explored a lot more about verbals in this first quarter of Grammar 5. So let's remember that verbals are words or phrases that are a verb, but they act like another part of speech. So one of the first ones you learned about was infinitives. So we're going to review that very quickly. Here we can see that infinitives can act as nouns, adjectives, and adverbs. So that first sentence, my favorite pastime is to read. The verbal to read, the infinitive to read, is renaming my favorite pastime. It's renaming the subject and the predicate, making it a PN. And the next sentence, we have the book to read is in the library. To read is modifying which book I'm referring to. I went to the library to read. To read in that third sentence is telling me, or the reader is telling them why I went. Why did I go to the library? I went to read. And then we have this book is fun to read. To read is telling me why it is fun. It's not telling me about the state of being, it's modifying the PA fun. So notice you've learned a lot about infinitives throughout this section of Grammar 5 and in Grammar 4. So just take your time and make sure you're identifying what is it telling you in that sentence, how is it relating to the other parts of that sentence. Another verbal that you've learned about is called a past participle, which was first introduced again in Grammar 4 as the perfect form for main verbs. But in this booklet, or actually in 5D, we learned that these verbals, the past participles, act like adjectives even though they look like verbs. So one example we have is Aaron only drinks filtered water. Filtered could be used as the main verb in a perfect form, but in this instance, it's modifying the type of water Aaron drinks. Now, another thing you've learned about that was first started actually back in Grammar 3 is prepositional phrases. We learned a little bit more about how prepositional phrases can be used. I'm mainly just going to go over how you can use prepositional phrases to describe nouns and verbs, but we've also learned that prepositional phrases can give you information about any sort of verb action or linking. So let's look at this example really quickly. We have the creek by my house flows through the forest. By my house is modifying where the creek is. It's giving us more information about that noun. And through the forest is telling us where the action is taking place. Where is the creek flowing? So just make sure you're paying attention to what the information is referring to when you are identifying your prepositional phrases. Now that we have gone over all that review material, we're going to get into the core of this video, and that's going to be sentence diagramming with functions of speech. This is something that you first learned how to do in Grammar 4, and we're continuing it in this level as well. So what we're looking at is just a blank diagram like this. We have no sentence to help us fill in these blanks. Instead, what we're doing is we're identifying our functions of speech, not the parts of speech, but the functions of each of these sections of a diagram. So we're going to start with our basics, with our core of the sentence, and that's going to be our subject and our verb, and then whatever comes in the predicate after the verb. So notice we have that slanted line. Well, we know that there are two things that can come after that slanted line, a PN and a PA. But also notice that we have a fun little modifier coming off of that section of the line. That little modifier is a curved line, which is what we learned about in the previous book, Grammar 5D, and that is a past participle. We just went over that in this booklet, or in this video, and we know that past participles act like adjectives. As we know, adjectives only modify nouns or pronouns. And so we have to assume that the blank is going to be filled in by PN, because if it was a PA, it would have to be modified by an adverb, because adverbs modify adjectives. So make sure you're paying attention to little details like that, because there are a lot of clues in these sentence diagrams as to what the functions of speech are. Now we can start filling in our modifiers. So we're going to start on the far left. We know that we have an adjective modifying our subject, because remember, adjectives modify nouns and pronouns. And then we have our infinitive. Well, our infinitive is a verbal. It's acting like a different part of speech. And in this instance, once again, it's coming off of the subject, which is a noun or pronoun, which means the infinitive is acting like an adjective. So you just need to put in that same abbreviation. You can spell out adjective if you'd prefer. Next, we have a prepositional phrase coming off of the verb. But remember, we are asking you to identify what is that phrase acting like. It's acting like an adverb. It's giving you information about the verb. It's modifying the verb. Therefore, you just put adverb. You can put adverb on any of the lines of the prepositional phrase if you'd like. This made the most sense to me. And then, of course, we've already gone over what comes off of the PN. It's going to be an adjective. So I'm just going to write that like that. So now we have essentially created our own reference page, and we can now apply that to a sentence. So we have the sentence, in the afternoon, the dish to serve is frosted cookies. So first, let's just mark out the parts of the sentence that will not be a part of the core. So we have a prepositional phrase, in the afternoon, and we have an infinitive, to serve. Both of these are going to be something separate from the core of the sentence. So I like to identify those first, and then we can identify our subject and verb. So our subject is going to be dish. Our verb is. And then we have the dish is frosted cookies, if we're going to read that without those two modifiers. Making cookies, our PN. It is renaming our subject and the predicate. It is following a linking verb. It's obviously a PN. Now we can go through and identify our modifiers. So we have in the afternoon. That's telling us when the state of being is occurring. Therefore, it is an adverbial phrase. So I can circle it and draw an arrow to the verb. The is modifying dish. To serve is also modifying dish. So I'm circling both of those and drawing an arrow to the subject. And then we have frosted. Frosted is telling us the type of cookies that are the dish to serve. So I'm drawing an arrow and I've circled that as well. Now we don't have to go through creating our sentence diagram because we've already had that provided for us. So I'm going to put it here, and now we can just fill it out. We have dish as our subject, is as our verb, and cookies as our PN. And now we can fill in our modifiers. The dish, to serve. Notice how we are putting in all of that information separately, to on the diagonal and serve on the horizontal line. And then we have our prepositional phrase acting like an adverb coming off of is, in afternoon, in the afternoon. and those each have their own separate lines, but they're all working together to create an adverbial phrase. And then we have frosted, modifying the type of cookies that are being served, what dish is being served. So that is how you will diagram that type of sentence. Make sure you're paying attention to where these phrases are coming off of, because remember, infinitives could be modifying the verb. They could be acting like the subject, the do, pn, any sort of things. So make sure you're identifying how these phrases and the words interact with each other within a sentence. Also, please use your reference material that you create as you fill in your functions of speech in a previous page, a previous day's work. If you have any questions, please contact the person who grades your grammar at your Gideon Center.